Ask 10 educators what inquiry is, you will get 10 completely different answers.
But I'm terrified of the chaos that may emerge.
Inquiry is not less teaching. It is more intentional teaching.
It isn't magic. It's architecture. And I actually feel capable of building it.
And this is just the beginning, the first workshop in the series, Inquiry That Actually Works, from Edo Do, Happy Learning. First, what inquiry actually is, and what it definitely isn't.
Welcome, everybody. Let's start with a frustrating truth. If you walk into a school and then ask 10 educators what inquiry is, you will get 10 completely different answers. Some will tell you it means letting kids ask whatever questions they want. Others will tell you it's project-based learning. And then some others will confidently tell you that inquiry means that the teacher needs to get out of the way, stay silent, and let the students discover the learning entirely on their own. This fakeness is exactly why inquiry is so often disappoints us in the classroom. We take a fuzzy idea, we get messy, chaotic result, and we conclude that inquiry just doesn't work. I know I felt that frustration. My name's Iwana, and while I'll actively try to use inquiry-based teaching, I constantly find myself caught in the messy middle. I can get my students hooked on a topic, but the moment the intellectual work gets hard, they hit a wall. They get frustrated and they beg me for the answer. And honestly, most of the time, I find myself giving them the answer. Assessing their messy thinking process exhausts me. So I default to grading their final, polished slideshow instead. Joining me to figure out how to do this right are two incredible educators. Benjamin, you've been feeling the weight of this too, but from a slightly different angle, right?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for admitting that it gets messy, because that is my biggest fear. I really want my students to think deeply. I don't want just to enter class and lecture them all the day, but I'm terrified of the chaos that may emerge. The viral advice is things like school strains curiosity out of kids, and that my job is just to provide a question and step back so that I don't rob them of the learning. But we are teaching, and I am teaching in a world that is evolving, a world that is changing. I have students who struggle with foundational reading and basic mathematical skills. Last year, I tried giving my year 8 students a project on sustainable environment issues. This was after I had finished a unit on linear relationships. I gave them a broad question and asked them to use the internet, and then stepped back. 3 days later, 2 groups were copy-pasting the data, the results, and the analysis directly from ChatGPT and other AI tools. Others were getting the information from Wikipedia without having a basic understanding of what they had captured. This was after doing a viva voce with some of them. So pure discovery ended up in a total disaster for my classroom. Plus, I discovered at the end of the day, I have a very huge curriculum to cover, and I felt incredibly inexperienced with this. It feels inquiry forces me to choose between covering my content and letting kids explore.
And I'm pretty sure that everybody who's, listening to this has lived the exact kind of ecosystem or any other project for that matter, nightmare, which is exactly why we have Brian with us today. Brian, you've mastered this approach in your own classroom, but you don't describe yourself as a guru on the side or a philosophical guru. You call yourself an architect.
Yes, and to say I've mastered it, I'd say I'm still improving. And the architect, I think that's right. And before we go further, I just want to say that Benjamin's fears are very valid. And the resistance to inquiry is a usually well-founded worry, not ignorance. Your fear of chaos is completely justified because the type of inquiry you describe, stepping back and turning them loose, genuinely does not work. The biggest shift for me was redefining what inquiry actually is. And inquiry is not free-floating curiosity. It's curiosity that's disciplined by evidence and shaped by the norms of a field. My favorite working definition is that inquiry is structured learning driven by meaningful questions and disciplined by evidence. And I want you to notice the word structured. The biggest myth in education is that inquiry means minimal teaching. Inquiry is not less teaching. It is more intentional teaching. Student-centered does not mean teacher absent. The reality of a highly effective inquiry classroom is that the students do the intellectual heavy lifting, but the teacher does the architectural heavy lifting.
So that's the promise, but here's the twist. The purest form of inquiry reliably fails. The research is brutal.
I like this framing, the architecture heavy lifting. And I think with this, we can dive into the first part of our conversation and tackle Benjamin's biggest fear, and actually a lot of teachers' biggest fear, which is the fear of chaos and the myth of pure discovery.
Yes, please. An interaction with different educators, irrespective of years of experience. I've had most of them claim that telling student anything is wrong and that unassisted discovery is the purest form of learning. But some time back in one of my class, I remember giving student a new concept and they were struggling with the concept. And with my assumptions of what inquiry really is, I had to let them swim to the end of the show. Are you saying I was actually supposed to help them?
Absolutely. I am saying you must help them. And there is empirical evidence on this that's incredibly clear and I find comforting. Unassisted pure discovery learning is reliably worse than explicit instruction. When researchers were taking a look at 580 comparisons of different teaching methods, they found that if you strip the support away and just tell kids, go discover, they do worse than if you had simply lectured them directly. In fact, Richard Meyer, a prominent cognitive psychologist, reviewed decades of evidence, included his conclusion was that pure discovery has failed so consistently, it deserves a 3 strikes rule, that we just throw it out. Even the PISA data from massive international tests shows a very sobering warning, and this is across 56 different school systems in different countries, different cultures, a lot of different contexts. And what it showed was that students who reported frequent exposure to unguided inquiry actually scored lower in science.
Wow. So many because my kids aren't smart enough for inquiry. It failed because pure discovery is essentially a flawed for novices.
Yeah, exactly. Cognitive, and the cognitive sciences, they explain exactly why it fails. And it comes down to that working memory is sharply limited for novel information. When you have a novice facing a brand new idea and a brand new process at the same time, unguided project, it's overwhelming. They drown in an extraneous cognitive load. But here's the good news. While pure discovery loses, guided inquiry consistently wins. In meta-analysis covering dozens of studies, when teachers added guidance, things like feedback, worked examples, scaffolding, inquiry modestly beat traditional instruction, and the studies show that teacher-led inquiry outperforms student-led inquiry. The active ingredient isn't the inquiry label, it's the level and direction of guidance.
If discovery alone fails, what works? Guidance. 6 forms of it, starting now.
And this is a massive paradigm shift, isn't it? If the guidance is the active ingredient, then what that actually looks like in the classroom. Because when teachers hear guidance, we often picture ourselves standing in the front of the classroom and lecturing again. How do we guide them without doing the thinking for them?
Yeah, that's the artistry within the architect, right? And that's why I like the word architect. Like architects, when they're doing buildings, they have to deal with the hard sciences of physics and the maths, but there's an aesthetic to it, and that's the art. And what I've discovered is there's actually 6 distinct forms of guidance, and they range from the lightest touch to the heaviest touch. The lightest would be what I call process constraints. So instead of telling your students, research ecosystems on the internet, you constrain the process by giving them vetted, high quality sources. So that reduces the chaos, but they still have to do the intellectual work of reading and connecting the evidence. Then you have what we call status overviews. And this is what shows the learners where they are in the process. And prompts, where you remind them to do something they already know how to do. Now, bear in mind, already know how to do this for a prompt. Like saying, have you checked the date on the source, right? Have you checked what the author has written in other places? Little bit heavier is heuristics, which that suggests how to do something, like advising them when sources disagree, look at who wrote them, right? And then the next heavier is scaffolding, which is the structure of the task itself. One great scaffold that I think a lot of educators are familiar with is like the Cornell note system of note-taking. That is a great way to visually separate observation, inference, and it forces them to organize their thinking.
I see how those keep the guardrails up. I'm trying to imagine I'm having my first class with my DP1s, and I make an assumption that they have learned about algebra in mathematics at earlier levels of study. But once I give or expose them to some question, I discover they're really struggling. And I ask myself, but what if they hit a wall and genuinely they don't understand a core concept? Then the 6th form of guidance, can I actually just explain it to them? I thought inquiry meant abandoning explicit instruction completely.
No. That's what we call myth number 6, and it's completely false. The 6th and heaviest form of guidance is explanation. So explicit instruction. So, and in this section, like you said, you made the assumption, which we all do. But when I'm watching them, I think of myself as like I'm a lifeguard, and I look to see if they're drowning, if they're really, really flailing. And then you, as a lifeguard, you don't say, oh, well, gee, what do I know? You jump in and help. You actively get involved. So explicit instruction and inquiry are complementary partners. They are not enemies, right? The strongest inquiry classrooms are very well saturated with well-timed explicit teaching, things like what I call like a mini lesson, right? And you use those for what I might call bottleneck skills, right? You use inquiry for meaning making, transfer, and application, but you use explicit instruction for those bottleneck skills, what you could, I think you referred to as a core concept, right? So the easy way to remember this is if it's a specific skill or capability that's missing, that's a bottleneck skill, and that stops the whole investigation cold. They don't know how to proceed, right? So, for example, if your students don't know how to read a complex data table, you don't let them discover how to read it, or they'll end up being like me, who I still struggle with certain forms of data tables myself as an adult because no one ever taught it to me and I figured it out on my own, right? But that's when you pause the inquiry and you run a short 5-minute lesson that's highly explicit, that goes through a worked example to show them what they need. Then you send them back into the inquiry. You haven't broken it, you've rescued it.
The idea of a lifeguard relieves so much guilt. I just pictured one of my class. Well, I was having some year 7 students, and it was the first time I was introducing them to the concept of a box plot, a box and whisker plot. Having taught them before, that is in year 6, about the measures of positions like the quartiles, median, I expected them to easily draw and visualize because every student likes taking the pencil and drawing. But I thought I've just thrown a 5-year-old into the pool and they're looking at me expecting me to serve them. And I felt like a bad inquiry teacher when I decided to remind them about the basic skills of median, mode, and any other skills that will be needed to model or explain a concept before they get investigated.
Yeah, well, you were actually doing your job. There was no need for guilt. But that guilt is based on this fuzzy understanding of what the group think about inquiry, right? But your role in the classroom will shift dramatically, and it is a dynamic shift that is based off of you observing, listening, watching, and testing where they're at. You are the most vital person in the room still. Throughout an inquiry, you're going to cycle through probably about 7 different roles, right? At the very beginning, you are the designer because you build the scaffold before the unit even starts. Then you are the provocateur, right? PYP teachers are great at this. Provocations for learning, right? Ignite the curiosity. Give the students a reason to be listening to what you're setting before them, right? And that's how you launch the lesson with something surprising. Get them hooked, right? Then you're the curator, right? Where we talked about you don't just turn them loose on a wide open, and you give them some sources. And another part with the curating, especially as you get to where we're trying to find some vetted good academic sources, sometimes you have to take that source before you give it to them and change the language to make sure that it's at an appropriate level they can access, right? And then you're the coach, you're the modeling it, and you're a facilitator of their discussions. And when it comes to facilitating these discussions, I tell you what, I'm finding, and I talk to colleagues, they're saying the same thing, regardless of where we're at and the particular cohort of students, that there's a real need for us to model and facilitate discussions in the classroom when students are disagreeing because of what's happening with social media and algorithms putting people into these echo chambers. And no one really is talking, especially if they have disagreeing. Like, there's no civil discourse in terms of disagreement. It's just, you're lying, you're wrong. And so we really have to model that for them. I spend so much time not working with content so much, but this skill that is just critical and being lost outside of school. And then, of course, as always, you're the assessor of their thinking in motion, right? We're constantly in formative assessment mode all the time, you know? And so what happens with all these different roles you're playing, if you get that visitor that pops in, they might be in what is actually a great inquiry lesson, and they don't see you up front lecturing. They're going to see you like, I'm always taking a knee next to people and listening and having a little conversation or a targeted question to test if when they look like they've got it, do they really, right? And they might think you aren't teaching if they really don't know what good inquiry looks like. But the truth is you'll work much harder in that lesson than if you had just sat up front and lectured. You have to be with your head on a swivel, constantly working. The intellectual load teaching in this way is much heavier. I feel it. I do. After a good lesson where they've really been working, I've been working very hard, and I need my breaks afterwards to recharge. You know, what they didn't see if they come into the room is that all that heavy lifting, the architectural work you did before the bell even rang.
But with all that guiding, when do you cover the actual content? That fear dissolves next.
And I think that's something worth kind of like sitting with, because it's inquiry-based teaching and learning. Therefore, the hard work is shared. And I think a lot of teachers, and this kind of like leads us into Benjamin's second fear, is time, right? And like in order to do heavy intellectual work and heavy architectural work, we're worried about the time that we need in order to teach the content. So I think we should move on into our second part and talk about the time dilemma, and in relation to that, how much freedom we should actually give our students. Benjamin, at the end of our last part, we touched on the idea that teachers shift from answer deliverers to architects of thinking, but you mentioned a second fear, which is the sheer pressure of time and obviously teaching the curriculum. Let's tackle that.
Reflecting, my first toughest experience as an educator was I was given a year 10 class, and it was 2 months to the mocks. There was a content to be covered, and because I did not understand what inquiry is, I highly incorporated it in my class. Before the mock exams, when we were reviewing the paper to see if our students can be able to do it, I discovered I was the only teacher who did not finish the syllabus. I feel this crushing weight to cover foundational facts. My fear is that if I dedicate weeks to open-ended inquiry projects, I simply won't have the time to actually teach the content my students need for their standardized tests. The viral message seems to be that content is yesterday's classroom. And because facts are an AI query away, we should only teach transferable thinking skills. But my kids need to know things, and honestly, trying to design a massive open project sounds completely overwhelming for someone with my level of experience.
And that's a valid concern, and I'd like to relieve you of that concern and guilt right now. What you're describing are actually two of the biggest myths in education, and let's just look at the first one. The idea that inquiry replaces content. It doesn't. Inquiry and content are not rivals, they are partners, and there's no such thing as content-free thinking. Students cannot develop inquiry abilities in a vacuum, right? They have to investigate actual subject matter. The subject matter is the vehicle through which inquiry abilities develop, not a cargo that's left behind.
So I don't have to choose between teaching content and teaching inquiry.
No, not at all. And it brings me to the second myth, which is the idea that every lesson must be a project and that all content can be taught by inquiry, right? Coming out of the United States, there was a National Research Council, and their guidance was really very clear and unambiguous. It is not possible in practice to teach all subject matter through inquiry, nor is it desirable to do so. If you try teaching all of your content using only one method, you're going to be ineffective and, quite honestly, boring, right? And that's an absolute inquiry killer, right? The master teaching skill isn't doing inquiry all the time. It's knowing which goal calls for which method.
And this again, it's another paradigm shift, and a very, it releases the guilt and the stress around inquiry too. But the question is, if we're not doing inquiry every day, how do we decide when to use it?
Right. We use a division of labor. We use explicit direct instruction for foundational facts, procedures, and what I referred to before as bottleneck skills, or Benjamin, I think you call it a core concept, right? And then you reserve inquiry for the deep reasoning, argumentation, and transfer goals. That's where the investment of the time really pays off. You don't have to feel guilty about directly explaining a foundational concept. The two work together. So you can stop asking whether to do inquiry or direct instruction and start asking, where do my students need explicit teaching and where do they need disciplined investigation?
Wow, that makes it sound much more manageable.
Here's the part nobody tells you. Inquiry isn't all or nothing. It's a dial.
But practically speaking, when I do decide to run an inquiry, how do I start without drowning? Jumping into a huge project still terrifies me because I don't think my students have the skills to manage themselves yet.
Yeah, and they probably don't, just like mine. And that's perfectly normal because, again, what we're talking about is them learning the skill of how to learn on their own, right? And so a big mistake is to throw them in the deep end of the pool before they know how to swim. Openness, I want you to think of it as a dial, right? Where you just open it up more as they're ready to grow. It's not a badge of how good your inquiry is. It's a structured investigation that teaches skill cleanly, can be explicit inquiry, while a wide open project leaves them drowning, and the results are going to be horrible.
Could you break that down? Like, what does this kind of like dial look like? Because I think a lot of the teachers feel like their students didn't come up with the question themselves. It's not authentic. It's not authentic inquiry. What does that dial look like?
Yeah, this idea that the students have to come up with the question themselves, that's another myth that we need to put to bed. The source of the question matters infinitely less than the nature of the question, right? Whether it requires evidence and judgment. So to help adjust this dial, I want you to think of this as what we would call a continuum of inquiry, right? Which breaks down any inquiry task by asking who supplies three specific things, right? The first is the question, the procedure, and the result, right? The more of those handles that the teacher supplies, the more guided the inquiry, the more the students generate, the more open it is.
My biggest concern will be, what does that look like in practice?
And this is where I lean into a couple of researchers, Heather Bounchy and Randy Bell, and they outline 4 distinct levels. And the most basic is confirmation, right? And this is where the teacher provides the question, the procedure, and the result that is one in advance. The students then are only verifying a concept, right? So that's why we call it confirm. They're confirming that what you've told them is actually true. I have fun with that sometimes with my students where I'll tell them something that's false. So they move up to real inquiry. That's they step into structured inquiry. And here, you as the teacher, you give the students both the question and the procedure, but they have to generate the explanation from the evidence.
So I could take a standard cookbook lab or a worksheet and simply withhold the expected answer, and I've just bumped it up to structured inquiry. Is this what you're saying,
Yes.
Brian?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. It's not even a leap. It's just sort of a nudge. It's a small shift. But once your students get good at analyzing data and forming conclusions, right, then we go and we turn the dial up now to guided inquiry, right? And here, you still provide the question, but the students now have to design the procedure and generate the explanation, right? But that means that you're pretty sure that they've already learned how different procedure so that they're comfortable with doing that, right? And the first time I tried to bump this up, I got it wrong. I thought they were ready, and sure enough, they were drowning. I had to jump in with one of those mini lessons and reteach it before I let them go ahead with it, right? But after they've banked those skills and they've got that, then you can go to open inquiry. Because what they've done is they've learned from you, because when you give them the question, you're modeling for them what a good inquiry question looks like, right? And then when you are giving them the procedure, you're modeling procedures for them. And you want to make sure that you throw in whatever your discipline needs, whatever the multitude of procedures there are, that you cover them beforehand, before you turn them loose, right? Because once they get to that point, it's open inquiry. And now the students can pose their own questions, design their own procedures, and generate their own explanations. And from my experience, be patient. It doesn't happen overnight, but you will get there.
Brian, this is a complete relief. I always felt like I was failing at inquiry because I wasn't doing open inquiry on day one. But what you are saying is that jumping straight to the deep end is usually a massive design error.
And one I've been very guilty of. Listen, I've gotten to where I am with lots of bruises and scars, so to speak, from getting it wrong. I actually went an entire semester trying to do open inquiry, and it was a disaster. And I cannot tell you the number of evenings where I was on the phone or I was confiding in somebody feeling I am a total failure because it wasn't working. And what I've learned, it's the most expensive mistake you can make. Because if you ask a novice to simultaneously frame a question, design a method, build an explanation, they will flounder. And the gap between your strongest and weakest students will become massive, right? I had classes where there's 25, 26 students in there, and 3 of them are doing great. And I'm spending the time wondering what the heck is wrong with the rest of them. And some of them just sort of gave up, right? And so that's why you have to start on shallow and then move them towards the deep end as you see they're able with those skills. And this is where that lifeguard image comes back in, because you are any good swim coach is an outstanding lifeguard. Okay, so remember that you can move that dial both ways, and and you may have a cohort of students that for one particular section they have the skill set and they know how to do open inquiry, but the very next day with something else you're doing, that's not the case. So it isn't that once they have it, it's applied everywhere. You have to judiciously work that dial back and forth. And if a new topic's particularly difficult, all the way back, you pull back to that more structure, because that's good teaching. That's not failure.
And I think that kind of like reshapes the way we approach planning as well. And I think as I was listening to you, I was, reinforcing the idea that inquiry is we're turning the dial on ourselves as well when we're planning and we're trying, and then we're failing in the classroom. It's that kind of like the messy middle, and we don't have someone to give us the answer, but we do finish the lesson, and then we reflect, and then we look at what what went wrong and what did we actually ask our students to do. And
Does this work in math, in history, in art class? Same anatomy, different grain.
welcome back, everybody. I want to shift the focus to something that has been a major personal pain for me. How does inquiry look like across different subjects? I teach humanities, and sometimes inquiry feels like a science experiment that someone just threw it in my classroom. And you, Brian, you often use this phrase, one anatomy, many grains, to explain this. Do the same principles actually apply to any subject, or does inquiry lend itself more to science-based subjects or particular subjects for that matter?
Yeah, I've been blessed through my career, often through a shortage of teachers or an unexplained absence, where I've taught a multitude of subjects, everything except for maths and science. And I have absolute respect for those who do. And I understand the constraints that people feel with that. So the one thing I can say, having worked with those teachers and having done it myself, is that it absolutely applies to every subject. And this frustration and concern is incredibly common, right? The problem happens when people try to transplant the one discipline's machinery directly into another. right? For example, if you try to force students to write a formal lab report in an English lit class, that inquiry loses its authentic feel because that's not in the domain of the literature class, right? So the students are just learning a rigid form without actually doing the thinking required by the discipline, right? And so this is where this idea of one anatomy, many grains comes in. And the underlying anatomy of any inquiry is universal, right? Those 4 stages on the dial and the 6 different levels of inquiry, they remain the same, right? And again, from the US, the National Research Council has established that there are 5 essential features of classroom inquiry, right? Learners engage with a question. They give priority to evidence. They build an explanation from that evidence. They connect it to existing knowledge or alternative explanations. And then they communicate and justify their reasoning, right? That's the universal anatomy. What changes from subject to subject is the grain, the meaning, what actually counts as evidence.
My biggest worry will be how this can be broken down, because from where I'm sitting, I can picture evidence in a science class. But how does evidence look like in a math or an art class?
It's completely different. And pardon the pun, but that's the beauty of it, right? In science, evidence is, of course, being able to reproduce a fair test or a systematic measurement, right? Which is why we have the scientific method. It's all designed so that somebody else can do what we did and either prove or disprove what our results were. But in mathematics, the evidence isn't an experiment. It's a worked case, a counterexample, a representation on a number line. And, my personal bane as a student, the proofs, the theorems and proofs of geometry, right? And then you get to history, where history, the evidence is now a corroborated primary source, right? That the students have to read for bias and perspective. In English, then it turns out to be the text itself, the specific diction, imagery, the narrative, right? The structure. And in the arts, the evidence is the work itself, the choices that the producer, the maker made, and the audience's documented response to that art.
So we are exercising the exact same intellectual muscles, the exact same thinking skills, asking questions, using evidence, building explanations. We're just applying them to completely different materials. And I think that's why we talk about inquiry being like a set of transferable skills, because the muscles are the same.
Yes, exactly right. A historian who's weighing sources to build an intellectual move, as a first grader drawing a model of how they think the roots of a plant work, right? They're both building an explanation from evidence and then revising it when the evidence pushes back on their explanation, right? You don't run a generic inquiry method that looks identical everywhere. You run inquiry that is specific to your discipline's demands.
And that makes so much sense, and it kind of like validates what my humanities classroom need.
Now, the hardest teacher skill of all, watching students struggle and not rescuing them.
But I have to ask about what happens during the projects. Let's say I've nailed the right grain for my subject, I launch the inquiry, the students are engaged, but halfway through the project, they just hit a wall. They get frustrated and they want the answer, whatever that answer looks like in the subject. And sometimes maybe, like out of frustration myself, out of time constraints, I usually come to their rescue and, I am being the kind of like bad lifesaver that you were mentioning before.
Yeah, you're not alone in that. There is an instinct to immediately, evaluate or jump in with the answer. And I like to call that the rescue reflex. Personally, that's one of the hardest things for me still is stopping myself from rescuing it. There's a difference between if it's a bottleneck skill or if you're rescuing them because there's silence and frustration, right? Like there's a moment of confusion and it's actually got a name, and it's called the affective dip, right? I might butcher the name, but Carol Kuthlau, right, conducted extensive research on information search process. And she found that early in a genuine inquiry, confusion, uncertainty, and doubt frequently increase before a focus forms. So you have to be very, very careful. And that is, again, some of the artistry here in being the architect of the thinking.
Wait, so getting more information actually makes them feel less sure at the first?
Yes. And that's what Kuthau called the uncertainty. She called it her uncertainty principle. It commonly increases uncertainty in early stages. The problem is that in most classrooms, students have been trained to think that if they're confused, they're failing, right? Or that the teacher is failing, which is becoming even more common. I even had a class where my students in design were asking AI if the way I was teaching was correct. And so, it's an interesting modern problem we've got. But that uncertainty isn't failure. It's where the disciplined thinking begins. And like anything disciplined, it's difficult. There's friction there that's necessary. And our job isn't to rescue them by giving them the answer right then. Our job is to protect this productive struggle. And I redefine the word struggle with my students very early on, right from the very first day. I tell them that they will hear me come up and ask them, what are you struggling with? Because to me, if you're struggling, you haven't given up, right? It's not so hard that you can't do it, right? It's not where there's a bottleneck skill missing, right? And if you're not struggling, it's too easy, right? So that struggle it's the sweet spot, right? What we call the zone of proximal development, right? It's a stretch, but it's not too much of a stretch.
Struggling is a point of concern in most of the classes, especially in math classes, because sometimes we don't genuinely know what type of struggle it is. So, Brian, how do I know if they are productively struggling or just completely lost? Because I've seen students shut down entirely sometimes.
Yeah, and this is a crucial distinction. And this has been, of all the skills involved with running an inquiry-based classroom, this is the one that I personally have struggled with the most, right? So productive struggle versus an unproductive floundering, right? So if the student's effort is going toward disciplinary thinking, weighing evidence and trying to build an explanation, even if it's slow and frustrating, that is productive struggle, and you have to hold the line, right? You have to resist rescuing. I've actually picked up from one of my favorite podcasters this thing where I put my finger over my mouth because it's a signal to me to shut up and don't, just wait. And I use one because it's like, for me, it's one moment. Just give them a minute. Let them, they don't need me yet. They need to work this out. You might offer like a light prompt, but the difficulty is the point, right? And unfortunately, with the advent of this ubiquitous AI everywhere, it's becoming more of a problem that we really have to focus on, in my opinion. Because if they're stuck because of logistics or confusion about the task, or because they're missing one of those prerequisite skills, right? Then that's unproductive floundering, and that's where we rescue and we jump in with that mini lesson, because they aren't learning anything.
So what do we actually do when they are floundering?
You step in, right? There's this diagnostic, like the question that I ask myself is, are they stuck on the thinking, or are they stuck because they lack the tools, right? If they lack the tools, then it's a bottleneck skill. For example, if they don't know how to read a primary source document, or how to control a variable. You don't let them struggle in that, right? You pause the inquiry, you provide that 5-minute explicit mini lesson that teaches that specific skill, and then you put them right back in the deep end, the pool, right? They get back into the investigation.
And what about the emotional side of the affective dip? How do we keep them from giving up before we reach the bottleneck?
This is where, like I mentioned, the most powerful thing you do is you name that in advance. You tell them, like I tell them, you're going to struggle in this. You're going to have difficulty. It's not easy, right? And I tell them, you're going to feel confused, and you're going to be like, I'm not sure if I'm right. I'm not sure if my thinking is correct. And I tell them, I go, that means you're doing real inquiry. You're not failing, right? You're struggling. That means you're learning, right? So when you name it and you give that ahead of time, right? So then you're planning. And and this is something I even model with them, is that I'll tell them how I'm struggling with something, right? I've got some grade 9 and grade 10 classes where I've told them, you're my guinea pigs. I'm trying something new, and I'm not sure if my ideas are right. So you let me know, and I let them know that I still do the same, right? And so that struggle, that struggling is, where you plan your heaviest support, right? This feeling of uncertainty it should be read as progress. Right? You plan your heaviest support for what Kuhlthau called the zone of intervention, which is exactly where that uncertainty peaks.
And I think what's really interesting to kind of like recap here is that this cannot happen if we don't do the architectural design first. Because when we plan the thinking, when we truly plan an inquiry-based lesson, we know where the students will struggle, or at least we can predict what are the points of, like the hardest struggle or the lightest struggle. And then we can actually plan like what are the items of support that we are going to offer at these different types within the struggle, because we have planned for them. And yes, there can be moments of surprise, but nothing that is going to, I think, shut us down, as in not knowing how to support our students.
But what if you ask and nobody speaks? The silence isn't what you think.
Welcome back, everybody. At the end of our last part, we touched on a terrifying reality for any teacher trying this out. You spend hours designing a worthy question, you curate the sources, you launch the lesson, and crickets. The room goes dead silent.
Yes, that silence is agonizing. I've had lessons where I pose what I think is brilliant, engaging question, and my students just stare at me. It's not that they aren't smart, but they seem completely paralyzed by the fear of being wrong in front of their friends. They fear the judgment they will get from their friends. If I don't jump in and rescue them with a hint or the answer, the lesson just dies.
This is so common, and I'm going to be brutally honest here. I have done, it's not just our students that do this, it's our colleagues, right? How many PD workshops have you been in where the workshop leader asks the question and the teachers who are there to learn are silent and looking and waiting to get the answer told? So, I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree on this one. But the shocker for me this past year has been, I've been doing a lot of workshops with school leaders, right? Don't ask me how I got invited to the group, but I did. And I've done a ton of these workshops. And I'm in a workshop where everybody around me is a director or a principal, a head of school, and they're dead silent. They don't answer either. They're also scared to death of being judged and what others are going to think of them, right? And I'm blissfully unaware of maybe this unwritten rule, and I'm typing away and I'm asking questions. I'm just like, okay, sure. So it's not just I have a lot of empathy for our students, and maybe they're learning some of it from us, right? So I think it's so common, and it's something that I had forgotten, that inquiry is a social act. It's not just a cognitive one. And so we tend to picture this inquiry as something happening quietly inside a learner's head, but the real inquiry is built out loud. In claims that get challenged, you put the idea out there. Like I've posed, and I might even get the grammar wrong. Hey, try doing that with a room full of English teachers when you're doing PD workshops, right? And it's like I suddenly feel, oh my gosh, I hope I can edit what I just posted. There's this fear, right? And it carries social risk, right? The students rarely go silent because they're not curious. They go silent because they've sort of, whether or not they feel it's a safe place for them to take a risk and to be vulnerable. They're afraid of looking confused or being wrong in front of their peers because they know that there'd be a ha, you didn't get it right. And feeling that pressure. It's a lot easier to just be quiet, because I tell you what, you have all of these, your whole peer group, if you get something wrong, is that that pressure is infinitely stronger than being silent, and the slight pressure of the teacher might think you're stupid, right? Like we have to remember that at this point in their lives, especially if you're working with middle school and high school students, the need to fit in with the herd and not be different and not stick out is biologically wired in. We have to create that safe space.
That makes perfect sense. I bet their mindset has been tuned to behave like in a relay. They've been trained for years that school is about having the right answer quickly. So how do we lower the social costs so they can actually feel safe enough to think out loudly?
Hey, you model it. You model the thing that they're most afraid of, not knowing. I frequently, in a design class, I will frequently say, I have no idea. I don't know. I started a unit with year 7s where they were going to build bird feeders for a non-migratory species of bird. I didn't have any idea. I hadn't looked it up ahead of time. I was hoping there'd be some non-migratories, but I could have been wrong. I was ready to rescue it if I was, but they were like, which bird? I'm like, I don't know. You think I know everything? I said, that's flattering, but I'm human just like you. So I will make mistakes and leave it on the board, or I will make a mistake with something that I've designed and built. I built myself a standing desk and I got the floor of it wrong, and I didn't hide it. The students came in the room and they're like, what's that? And I go, that's a mistake. And they go, what? And I said, yeah, I made a mistake. I'm making myself a standing desk, but I got this whole thing wrong, so I've got to redo it. So I put myself there so that if the person in the room that they've been trained is supposed to have all the answers and be perfect and judges and evaluates them, is able to say, I don't know, or I got it wrong, it really lowers the bar for everyone else in the room, because then if I can make a mistake, they can make a mistake, right? So, students will not tolerate the confusion of an investigation in a room when not knowing looks like failure or feels like failure. They're only going to tolerate it where the most expert person treats not knowing as being normal, at the front edge of thinking, right? I'll tell them that I'm struggling with things, right? Physical objects, things related to teaching, right? The most powerful cultural force we can control in this is our own fallibility, and highlight it for them, right? When a student asks a tough question, the most consequential, important sentence they can hear you say is, I don't know. Let's find out, right? And they'll come to me and they'll say, is my answer, or is this the answer? And I go, what'd your research say? Like, right, go do some research because I don't know the answer. I was just going to say it. As a result of this, some teachers have been afraid, and they're like, well, then why would they even listen to you about anything? But what I found is that the end result is that it has never weakened my authority. It just relocates it from having all the answers to knowing how to get to them.
And I think that's essential, because in this way we're also not only demonstrating learning and thinking about learning and being uncomfortable when the learning gets hard, but at the same time we're showing them intellectual humility. And that, I think, obviously creates more trust between the teacher and the students. We're part of the same team.
Yes.
The fix costs nothing. 3 seconds of silence and one magic question.
So building upon this kind of like idea of trust, we have build the trust, we ask a great question. How do we actually get the ideas bouncing across the room instead of just having a ping pong match between the teacher and that one kid or two kids that always put their hands up?
Yeah, the answer to that is, silence. In the 1970s, there was this researcher, Mary Budd Rowe, and she went around and she timed the silences in science classrooms. And she found that after asking a question, teachers typically waited about 1 second before doing something, rephrasing, calling on someone, or answering themselves. So that silence is something that we have to get comfortable with.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. I sometimes refer to it as a rescue reflex. If silence feels like failure, so I fail it.
Yeah, and I think I don't know a teacher who we all do it, right? But Rowe found that when teachers then deliberately extended that pause to 3 to 5 seconds, the changes in the room were absolutely dramatic, right? Student responses got longer. Their speculative thinking increased. Students started saying maybe and it could be instead of only offering a safe, certain answer, right? So then we get away from that one student who knows, who's always like some others, that it opens up a space for them to, if they feel safe, posit a possible, I think, or maybe, right? So it's most important, like students who teachers had written off as being slow, they began to participate as well.
So this was just like moving from like 3 to a 5 second silence.
Oh yeah, and I've actually I've purposely gone even longer. There are times where I have this almost catchphrase where I'll tell students, the answer is not on my forehead, is it? Okay, then you have to tell me. I'm not going to tell you. It's like, is there something written here? No? Okay, why are you all looking at me? Right? and so I want you to think of it as 2 wait times, right? Wait time 1 is the pause after you ask a question, right? And then wait time 2, and this is also super important. This is a pause after the student finishes speaking, right? So they waited about 1 second in Rowe's research before jumping in with something, and what she found is that most teachers react in 0.9 seconds after a student talks. We're so happy that somebody joined the party there. Yes, right? And the instincts immediately to evaluate and go, good, right, well, not quite, not sure, and oh, this is something I've struggled with myself. Because that that answer that is an evaluation of what they said is going to slam the door on any other thinking before it actually finishes unfolding, or before somebody else might want to join in. If you've already said that answer is wrong, well, I'm not going to join. Or if you said that one's right, oh, good, done. I just have to remember that. So you have to hold that second pause, because what we find is that speaker will often keep going. What was the first sort of shallow answer where they were sort of testing the waters,
That is so practical. I can start counting to 5 in my head tomorrow. But when the 5 seconds are up, what do I actually say to keep the inquiry moving without just giving them the answer?
Yeah, and this takes me back to one of my professors I had when I was doing my teacher training. And in one of the conversations I had with her, she told me something that I understand it now better than I did at the time. And I think I'll even understand it more as I keep going. But he said the most important thing you do as a teacher is come up with questions. Your questions in your planning are the most important, right? And so when you use this, it's probably the single highest leverage point in the entire pedagogy, right? And this one works identical in science, history, literature, math, any subject. Once a student has dropped an answer there, whether it's brilliant, if it's halfway there, or if it's completely wrong, it's the same question. What makes you say that?
And it's so simple. What makes you say that?
Just 5 words. It's it. But it does something incredible, because in that little question, you're going to do something that an entire lecture couldn't. You're going to move the student from sharing an opinion now to actually citing evidence. Now, remember that evidence is different for every subject, right? But it normalizes an expectation now that their assertions and the things they say come with grounds, right? And for IB teachers that do TOK, this is bread and butter, right? What makes you say that? How do you know what you know? So crucially, it is completely status neutral. You haven't said whether you think it's right or wrong, or if that's the answer you wanted, right? Because you're asking it of a confident answer, a tentative answer. So it never signals to the student they're wrong. What it signals to them is they should have evidence for that answer.
And I think this is so important, because by doing that, we're not only lowering the social costs, but also from what I've seen, like students, that's the time for the students when they actually check in with themselves. And the moment they start to phrase the answer to that question, they can go, oh, right, I don't think I thought that through. Or if they thought that through, they might actually add to their own thinking. So this is wonderful, because we are protective of that thinking space through the wait time, and then we are asking them, what makes you say that?
Honestly, just knowing that silent isn't dead time is a crucial knowledge. It's important to know that silence is thinking happening, and this will take a massive weight off my shoulders.
None of this survives grading, though. Grade the poster, and you reward polish, not thinking. What do you assess instead?
Let's move into our 5th and final part. We've covered the fear of chaos, the pressure of time, and the mechanics of getting students to actually talk and reason. But there's a massive elephant in the room, and that is assessing and grading.
Absolutely. This is the part that exhausts me before I even start thinking.
Exactly. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I get completely overwhelmed by trying to assess the missing thinking processes. If the students are working on an investigation for 3 weeks, I physically cannot grade every single rough draft or sticky note or conversation. So I usually just default to grading their final polished slideshows or writing or posters, because it's easier. But Brian, it sounds like there's a major problem with this approach.
Yeah, it's an understandable trap, right? But grading only the final product actually corrupts the entire inquiry process, right? If anybody's taught in MYP and you know about the personal projects, one of the things that they dropped was grading the product. And that's why, right? When the grade is only landing on the final artifact, there's 3 really dangerous things that happen here. Firstly, it rewards the wrong target, right? A confident wrong answer with beautiful fonts and a clean design often gets a better grade than an honest, evidence-driven investigation that ends with, we're still not sure. I think this is the answer, right? It rewards polish more than thinking.
And what are the other two?
Well, secondly, if you're only looking at the product, it hides the learning. You don't see the struggle in that polished product, right? And the real intellectual work of inquiry, which was sharpening a question or finding a source that forces you to reconsider, or having, one of your claims collapse under peer review and critique, that happens before the product is made and leaves no trace of it, right? So thirdly, it punishes revision, right? If only the end state is marked, a student who changes their mind looks identical to one who got it right on the first try, but changing your mind when the evidence demands it is the exact sort of behavior that we need and we're supposed to be growing.
Okay, I can see the danger. But if I'm not supposed to just grade the final project and I can't fall back on a standard multiple choice test because that feels like it misses a point, what am I supposed to assess?
Well, kind of hit the nail on the head regarding multiple choice tests. My first year of teaching, I got thrown in the deep end by the school. They thought, we know that the English classes for grades 6, 7, 8, 9 are going to be moderated this year by the IB, so we're going to give them all to Mr. Jackson. And so I learned by being thrown in the deep end by them that multiple choice tests limit a student's achievement to that band 3-4 level, because you can't assess higher order thinking with multiple choice tests, right? And the U.S. National Research Council, again, they've explicitly warned that conventional testing like this is too broad, too shallow, or too narrow to measure any kind of inquiry. And instead, we need to assess 3 specific outcomes, right? Conceptual understanding, which do they grasp the ideas, right? The ability to do the inquiry, can they ask and investigate and reason? And understandings about inquiry, do they grasp how knowledge in this field is built and revised?
And this third one, understanding about inquiry, is the one we always tend to skip, or almost always tend to skip. Practically speaking, how would we gather evidence for all the 3 of those without drowning in paperwork?
The solution is triangulation, right? Instead of relying on one massive graded product, right, you draw judgment from 3 independent windows, which are conversations with the student, observations with the student, and the products that they're producing.
Wait, can they be broken down?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Conversations. This is what every good teacher does every single day. Just the little check-ins, right? Where I'll lean over a student's shoulder and I'll say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" Right? And that's enough for me to know where they're at, right? A quick 90-second, if you've got group work going on, right? You ask them to why they chose that source, right? And observations then is watching how they're sorting their data or noting. And that's something I can do, either like if they're working on a Google Doc, I can virtually observe their work without them even really seeing that I'm looking, which I found takes some of the pressure away than if I walk over and look over their shoulder, right? Especially given that I'm kind of a big, tall guy, that's kind of intimidating to smaller students. So I tend to take a knee or to look virtually so they don't feel a pressure. And then looking at the products, like the drafts of it, right? Claim, evidence, and reasoning checkpoints, and the final piece, right? So triangulation isn't any extra work. It's just sort of naming and making explicit things that would be just good teaching, right? And things that I'm sure we're all doing already. So when you're circulating around and listening, that's triangulation just means that you're going to make a note, right, of what you saw and heard, right? And you're building eventually a defensible picture over time that when you award a mark, you can go back to the evidence you have from these conversations and observations.
What you have shared has made me think of the inverse relation between tests and my standard level students. These students, will they not feel like they are constantly taking tests if I'm doing all these checks?
That really depends on how you deliver it, right? Like I could ask the same question of a student and make them feel pressure, right? With my pronunciation, my body language, the tone of my voice, right? So again, this is the artistry of it, where, and if you notice them feeling like they're being evaluated, I often go, hey, I'm just checking in. This isn't, I'm not grading you, right? I'll take that pressure away. And that's getting to know them and reading their facial expression and body language. And so these are just formative, small checkpoints, right? Really, really informal, right? Frequent, right? So at least by the midpoint on a draft, or it can also be a peer critique or review, right? When they're in the middle of creating, say, a draft report, and you have them peer review using the rubrics you've designed, and then you get to check both of them, right? You get to see if they understand the rubric and how it applies to their work, as well as where they actually are, right? So the thing to remember is that most of the process earns feedback, not marks, right?
I think this is a really important distinction between how we formally assess and, like between formative feedback and grading. And I think it's essential because we're not giving numbers to all the checkpoints. We're not giving numbers to all those observations. Hey, what are you doing? But asking the question and then answering to what they are actually doing, it is a formative feedback, a formative checkpoint.
Exactly, yes. You don't put a mark on the journey. You just give it feedback, right? And what I've always tried to do is, with that feedback, firstly note a strength and something they're doing well, so that they don't always think every time they see the writing, oh, I'm going to find out what's wrong. Like build them up with what they're doing right, and then feedback for improvement. That's my mantra, right? If what I'm saying isn't going to help move them forward, why am I saying it, right? So think about like an inquiry journal. It's supposed to be like a thinking space where students freely can mash everything up, and going again like Cornell notes, where they have the question and then there's all the bits, the messy stuff in the middle where they're gathering evidence, and the bottom you've got where they've kind of drawn a conclusion. Those are brilliant for this, right? And then you're looking at it, and the moment you grade that, it stops being an honest record of confusion and starts becoming something that is a polished product, a performance, right? And you don't want that, so you don't want to put a mark on that work, right? That is where they get to be messy, and it's one of the, we're always trained to understand what's happening inside their heads. So if you get them using that tool where you can see it, you don't want to mess with that, right? Because you want them to be able to still write, I'm stuck and I don't know why, right? My own personal notes of massive question marks that are on there, question mark explanation point when I'm frustrated, can't find the answer. We want to have them still doing that, right? And that gives you that chance to take on the role of being their coach, right? So you give feedback on the process to guide them, and we save any kind of grading or marking for that final evidence-based argument and specifically design performance assessment tasks, right?
That is a massive relief. It removes the pressure of grading every single step. But when we do grade the final argument, how do we make sure our grading isn't subjective? Since inquiry doesn't have a neat answer key, I always worry students won't know what I'm looking for.
Well, one structural thing you can do to ensure grading isn't subjective is something that the IB has put out to all schools about, every mark on an assessment task should be standardized, right? So it's never just your opinion. And I think that's great practice, even if you're not working in an IB school, right? Get a second opinion on it. But the other thing is that's really powerful, especially for what you're saying, of if the students know what you're looking for, right? Co-construct it with them. Co-construct the criteria. Write the rubrics with the students, right? Before you even begin the project, right? So this backwards planning by design, right? You start with that at the very front end and you build it with them, right? Don't hand them the rubric, build it together with them. I do this by projecting up onto the screen, if you're like, here it is, this is where we're going to get to, and now how are we going to judge it? You help me. And again, this requires different levels of scaffolding, right? But you build it together.
And I think this, again, kind of like connects to this architectural design, because it's impossible to build a rubric with the students if, as a teacher, we don't know where we're going, which can be the case, especially in, like in the beginning, in building the units and vertical alignment. And it can sound very, very intimidating, like co-constructing the criteria. How would you even start that conversation?
Oh, well, I would always start by analyzing a piece of, what would be exemplary work, right? This is a home run. Take that piece and you show the class, 2 or 3 of these gold standard examples, right? And I also show them a mediocre one, right? And I'll even with some classes where I've got a good rapport, I'll even show them a really, really bad one, like saying, and I will talk to them in terms of like, and I know you all can do better than this, right? So nobody in here is going to be getting a 2. Nobody's going to be getting a 3, because who in here, like you guys, you see what I'm saying, right? You can do better, right? So, and that's a big confidence booster for them, and letting them know I believe that you are capable, right? And you ask them questions again. So this is inquiry. It's still inquiry, where you ask them what sets this piece of work apart from this other one, right? And that's what's powerful. They'll don't jump in and save them on this, right? You gotta let them work out what's the difference there, because if they can do that, then they will absolutely know what you're looking for in an exemplary piece of work on their own terms, because they've been able to articulate it themselves, right? And as they name the differences, I note them. Right. And this is the beauty of, like, if you can project onto a whiteboard, it works great, because then I've got it up there and then I'll just write what they've said. Right. And so you're reverse engineering the quality rather than just having them receive a list of abstract objectives or command terms, right? That you're giving to them because they helped write it. They have ownership. They've had agency in it. And it's also a chance for you to be able to test and make sure everybody in the room's contributing and that they all understand what's going up there, right? And they will understand what good and what great looks like. So, it turns self-assessment and peer assessment into a real usable skill, because you're also modeling that for them to do later.
And I think one key phrase that you use, that I actually call it student-friendly language, like I write it with them in student-friendly language. You said they wrote them. So it completely kind of like removes the complaint or removes the concern of what does this teacher want from me. And it makes, invisible expectations completely visible, as they should be.
Looking back at our work, I significantly experienced a shift in my perspective. At the beginning, I was working I felt terrified that inquiry meant abandoning my post, letting the room descend into chaos, and hoping that students magically discovered the curriculum on their own. Now I see that couldn't be further from the truth.
And I think it's important to synthesize that, because this is probably the essential aspect, because we started by dismantling the myth of minimal teaching. We established that inquiry is definitely not less teaching, is more intentional teaching and architectural design. We learned that we don't have to throw students into the deep end immediately, and then we can use the continuum of inquiry to turn the dial of freedom slowly from structure to guided to open, so that they build the readiness they need.
Yeah, and don't forget we explored, to protect that productive struggle during the affective dip, that predictable moment of confusion that's going to come, without jumping in to rescue them with the answer.
Exactly. We talked about extending the thinking time, or the wait time, from 3 to 5 seconds, and simply asking, what makes you say that? Simply asking for evidence of their thinking, which completely transforms the conversation in the room. And then finally, we looked and we learned at how we can triangulate our assessment and value the thinking process, not just the polished end product. The throughout line of this entire pedagogy is incredibly clear, that students do the intellectual heavy lifting because the teacher has done the architectural heavy lifting.
Finally, I feel I have a roadmap, or my compass has been aligned in the correct direction. It isn't magic, it's architecture, and I actually feel capable of building it.
Good.
And that's exactly the goal.